Collective. Let's get started today. I'm afraid to share my screen again. I think I'm gonna just keep it on video for now because I don't want to danger any of the technology that we have currently set up and working. But welcome to Convo Collective. I'm going to talk through some announcements. Y'all saw some of those slides. Hopefully you were paying attention to some of the links and info we had on them. If not, I'm going to be covering some of those and we'll be posting them in the chat. So as I talk through this, just reference that chat if you need direction to anything. But welcome to Conversational Collective. We're an open, inclusive community exploring, learning, discussing and creating conversational technology. I'm your host, Lauren Golembeski, and I'm going to be joined by some fantastic expert panelists today. Especially a thank you to some of our international attendees and panelists who are joining us in different time zones and all across the world. We're really excited to bring Conversational Collective events to you every third Wednesday of the month. Sometimes we host it earlier in the day US time, sometimes later in the evening, trying to ensure that we include the worldwide conversational community. Today we're going to be talking about conversation design and branding and how to execute those two important pillars of conversation interfaces, how we kind of manage those two important pillars. And we'll be chatting with some really awesome experts, which we'll introduce in a bit, and they'll introduce themselves. Before we get started, I just want to cover a few items. First, want to thank my fellow organizers, Brittany Walla, Christy Torres, our founder, Jessica Nunn, myself, Matt, and Meredith all come together, put together Conversational Collective as a labor of love. And we've put together another great event. So hopefully you'll join our community. If you haven't already seen links, please sign up for that community. Joining that community will get you access to our newsletter, which we just send out, no spam. It's really just informing you about our upcoming events and important news in the industry. It'll get you access to our Slack channel and our LinkedIn group, which are two places that we also have a lot of activity talking about conversational AI, design, development, branding, etc. I want to thank our sponsor, Voxable. If you're not familiar, Voxable is a conversation design platform for teams that want to build better voice and chat apps. It helps teams design, test, and refine their conversation designs. Matt, Brittany, and myself are all co-founders of Voxable. If you're interested in checking it out, please visit our site at voxable.io and sign up for our private beta, which is currently going on. You can learn about all of our upcoming events, like I said, in our newsletter, but also be sure that you follow us on Eventbrite. That's primarily where we post all of our upcoming events. And let me see if I'm missing anything. If you haven't already, introduced yourselves in the chat. Where are you from? What brought you here? What interests you? I really want to encourage you guys to think of questions that you have about conversation design and branding. Whether you're new to this space or you're a veteran, these experts can kind of cover that breadth. And so we want to include everyone in it. Oh, it looks like Brittany is bringing up the slideshow for us, so I'm not just a talking head. Great, we have that. As you can see, this is the great event we have going. And then I also want to encourage everyone to find us on YouTube. You are currently at one of our awesome events, but we host these every month. We have great content on YouTube, and we have all of our past events up there for you to check out. Subjects everywhere from design, branding, natural language understanding, testing. We cover a lot of different things in the conversational AI industry, and all of that's up on YouTube. This video as well will be posted on YouTube in a bit. And so you can share out all the great ideas that we talk about. And we have a pretty simple agenda today. We're going to dive into our event. All of our other announcements are over. Really simple event. I did the introduction, so now we're just going to dive into our panel questions. But first, I want to have our awesome panelists introduce themselves. I'll be chatting today with Abigail Baldwin, Hillary Black, and Inga Breede about, like I said, conversation design and branding. We already have a lot of great questions. We asked attendees to submit questions when they signed up, and we have questions about career advice, how to transition into a job like this in design and branding, as well as like specific marketing tactics for when you are in the midst of writing copy for a conversational interaction. What do you do and how do you employ principles from design and branding in those moments? But before we dive into that, I want to have each speaker introduce themselves. We're going to start in order from Abigail to Hillary to Inga, but I'll kick it off and to Abigail and have you introduce yourself and what kind of brought you here today.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Lauren, for that intro. I'm Abigail, and I co-founded the creative studio Buttercrumble, and we're based here in the UK. We're really about granting the power of self-expression to organisations across the globe through branding and design. And some of our clients include large retailers such as John Lewis and Mamas and Papas, who you may have heard of. So we do have commercial sense, however, we're also community sensitive. So our design does have a focus on accessibility and inclusivity. And because of this, I do really have an interest in conversation design and making sure that it is very kind of human-led, human-driven, and there's authentic conversations. And I hope I can share more today about how branding can support this. So thank you.
And I will quickly introduce myself. My name is Hillary Black, and I am both a conversation designer and a marketer. So my background is I have like 10 years of experience in social media marketing, from anywhere from Beats by Dre to Vine. And then from there, I sort of discovered conversation design about like 5 years ago. And I am a co-founder of the technology platform Mav. We do automated SMS conversations. And so that was where I really, keyed in my branding and like persona development for chatbots and SMS as my primary channels. And then I also head up all of the marketing there. And additionally, I am the founder of conversationdesignerjobs.com, which is the first and only job board for specifically conversation designers. We just launched conversation designer profiles. So if you are a conversation designer, if you want to become one, you can create a profile there so that you are able to match with employers based on your specific skills, whether that is Boxable, whether that is any of the other platforms that you have skills in. And I'm super excited about that. I also create a lot of content. I have an online community called Conversation Designers Internet Club, where we just share best practices. We share all tips and tricks as it relates to conversational AI across every interface. And I also have an online course for chatbot writing and design with UX Writers Collective.
Woo! That's awesome. Shout out.
I do a lot of things.
She's on the internet a lot. That is lots of places to go interact with Hillary after this. And let's pass it over to Inga, who I know is involved with Women in Voice, which is also another amazing community in this space.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everyone. I'm Inga Breede. I am a media professional and voice tech ambassador based out of Toronto, Canada. For over a decade, I was working in film, television for large companies such as Entertainment One and Disney, and creative marketing services before transitioning into the world of academics and voice. Currently, I am a senior educational technologist at the University of Toronto, as well as the founder of VoxHive, which is an interactive audio startup focused on building voice-first experiences. And as Lauren mentioned, I'm also an ambassador for Women in Voice, the Canadian chapter. And my goal is to find opportunities to build and support the Canadian voice community and to learn from others in the community.
Awesome. Yeah, I know voice is super thriving in the Canadian community. There's a lot of companies and a lot of people in that community. I see a lot of that. It's good to see. And also with the European community, there's a lot of work being done. I know there's women in voice chapters all over the place. I know there's you lead the New Jersey chapter, but there's chapters in Europe, in Latin America. So if you haven't, to all of our attendees, if you haven't already gotten involved with Women in Voice, please look out for that group because they're doing great things, and there's a big event coming up that they're hosting. Okay, so thanks so much for those introductions. I'm super excited to dive into our questions. I wanted to start though with a more foundational question, just to anchor us all into what conversational branding and design even is, because there might be some people on here that either have a misunderstood understanding of it or a different understanding of it, not that it's wrong, but I want to kind of talk to our experts and understand what you kind of think of the foundational brand and design pillars of this conversational AI realm that we find ourselves in. So I'll pass it back over to Abigail. I guess we're going to kind of go in that order again, but pass it back over to Abigail. Just kind of start us off with your perspective on branding.
Thank you. For me, branding is the behavior of a business or organization, or even yourself, to be honest, because personal branding is such a huge thing at the moment. And because it is behavior, it is so broad, but essentially you can see it as a little bit of a compass. It's something to kind of help steer you and make decisions. If you are an organization, I would say that branding is also your salesperson that works 24/7 without you even really kind of knowing it. Like, the branding is doing a lot of the work for you in terms of selling, communicating, and really connecting with your audience. If you don't have a brand, then you as a company, you have no voice or no identity, and without that, you've become quite forgettable because there's just no identity there. So this is why branding does play such a large part in conversation design, because I do think it acts as a compass to help you make decisions on how, you know, what the conversations look like. So yeah, it's DNA, personality of the organization or you as an individual.
Yeah, it's super interesting. As you're listing those qualities, I think of qualities, it matches very similar to what we might think of as qualities of a conversational interface, period. So that's super interesting, and keep that in mind as we think about design. I'll kick it over to Hillary to add her comments.
Yeah, so one of the most interesting things that Abigail mentioned was that this is your salesperson that's operating when you're not around. Like, your brand is sort of the face of you forever, all the time. And that's exactly what like an automated experience would be. You know, it's something that is acting for you when you are not there. So it really kind of like plays into the brand aspect of that. But what is, I think the differences between just like a brand, whether that's, you know, an online brand or, you know, your just brand in general for your company or for yourself, is that these automated experiences and these interfaces are a lot more dimensional. So there are so many layers to how you can incorporate branding to this, whether it is, you know, the images and the media that you're using, and that might be branded, whether it's the persona that you have for your experience, and that might be branded and, you know, speaking to your audience in the way that only you do. Or you could even think of like sonic branding for voice. So that could be something where you're using specific voices, you're using specific sounds, you're using specific music. And that is a way that you can introduce branding to your voice interfaces. And those are all just things that like aren't really available for brands as a whole, unless you are utilizing conversational interfaces. So I find it to be incredibly interesting. And it is just something that it speaks so much more to. You do need to think about it when you are approaching your design and when you're approaching your strategy for creating something like this, because it's not something that you can be there to watch. So you need to make sure that you are creating it for it to sustain on its own after it's already live interacting with people on your behalf, because there's not going to be a human really behind the controls. And maybe there is who's kind of stepping in. But even that, like saying if it's customer support or something like that, you might say we're always a brand that, you know, if a customer has a question, we want a human to be the person interacting with them. So you would make those decisions based on your type of brand, and you would design your experience around what you want your customers to be experiencing. So yeah, I just find it all so incredibly interesting. And with like my own background in marketing outside of bots, it really sort of brings both of it together, which is really cool.
Yeah, I love how you're bringing in some of those ideas of, we have a traditional framework and that still applies, but we just have these new inputs and they're maybe not even so new. And that's why I think it's great, Inga, to bring it over to you, is your perspective in audio production and creating a voice first startup in VoxHive and thinking about those new affordances in a deeper way. Inga, like, what is some of your perspective around how people can leverage some of these new technologies, and how does that inform branding and design in what you do?
Well, I think Abigail and Hillary totally covered in terms of branding and finding your voice and your identity. And I think once you've done that, you also have to think brands in general are much more interactive with their audiences, like especially in the last 10 years. So it's not a one-way conversation anymore. So you also, once you figured out what your branding is, what your identity and what your voice is, now you have to think about what spaces are available to you, what makes the most sense for your brand, and when to speak and when to engage with your audience. So I'm always thinking about the audience first. I'm their biggest proponent for just thinking about what conversation they want to have first in all of this. So that's all I have to add.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great segue into another question. So maybe back to you, Inga, around how do you figure out those questions that your audience wants to have, and how do you match, or how does that inform the branding work that you're then doing to craft some of those elements?
I bring it back to a very human, basic level. At the end of the day, it's a conversation between whether it is AI or not, it is a conversation. So knowing who your audience is, if it means testing a conversational design with another human being who you anticipate would be the ideal user. That could be a child, it could be, a certain age group, any sort of demographic. If you can find that test group and actually test a conversation with them and see where it flows, it makes a huge difference. In my case, and I only learned this like sort of coming into voice, I also have a background in improv comedy. And turns out that is super useful in the world of conversational design, because you are always having to sort of just yes and go with the flow with the conversation. And yeah, it turned out that skill was very useful. So I think just yes anding the conversation can be super helpful. And yeah, again, just thinking about testing it out with another human being if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely feeds into the idea of humanizing and bringing it back to creating technology that is, more aligned with our own values and patterns of communication. And when we sometimes just want to shout at technology like I did, wouldn't that be cool if we could? Cool. So I want to talk a little bit about, kind of in our title, we talked about this notion of delight, or, what that means to create delightful experiences with conversational interfaces. And so I want to bring it back down to Abigail, what do you think that kind of delight or surprise means, and how can brands achieve that in conversational interactions? Or maybe what should they not be thinking about when they're doing that also?
I would say that it's about a brand that's backed by this human-led and human-driven story is always going to cultivate authenticity. So, you don't have to be perfectly polished. You can have a bit of personality in there. And that's going to create trust, because when another person can actually see that you're not just trying to be there forever, you can almost go down the road of trying to please everyone and trying to be so perfectly polished that people just think, oh, this like, if you're speaking to everyone, you're speaking to no one. They're just like, oh, there's a disconnect. So I think by trying to really cultivate that authenticity and through the brand showing that you are real, you keep it real, then yeah, you are going to really create those connections, and it's just going to be a much stronger brand experience.
Yeah, I love that, because I think we've all seen when brands get that wrong and aren't speaking to their audience correctly, or are trying, or just blah. They fade into the background because they have become that everything to everyone, the way that insurance companies maybe have to be. And that is a brand choice, because they are a wide, array. They serve everyone. And so some brands have to sit in that space, but conversational to I think Hillary's point, conversational experiences have the ability to speak and provide some of that interaction. So maybe Hillary, you can touch upon some of the ways that you see delight, because that seems to be such a a blank space that you see where brands have the opportunity to start providing delight via these channels.
Yeah, it's so interesting because to me, the biggest thing that an automated experience can do to delight someone is just to work. Like, to me, it's, are you doing what you say you can do, and are you accomplishing that outcome? That to me is the biggest thing that I love. But I do think that a lot of it can be led even by some of the mistakes that brands are making. So a lot of times especially with chatbots, you tend to notice that they all kind of are acting the same. They all are kind of saying the same thing. And a lot of them are trying very hard to be funny and to be witty. And just because you want to sort of have that delightful moment with your user, that doesn't mean that you have to be making them laugh. And I think a lot of it can come down to the sentiment of the people when they're entering the conversation. What do they want to hear? And how can you sort of match what they're actually looking for is a really good way that you can sort of use as a guiding light when you are creating your persona. But I also think it can appear in many different ways. So it could appear when maybe the user is asking something that your bot actually doesn't do, and how you are actually responding to that in real time. How are you making them feel like they didn't do something wrong? And how are you kind of adequately replying to them with a tone of voice that actually makes sense for your brand and makes sense for your audience? And so that's where I think a lot of it can come down to what's your personality on social media? That's sort of a really good way, and I think a good frame of mind to be in when you're interacting with people, because a lot of times you are saying something in a way because you want to elicit a certain response from the user. And so this is just doing that, except for it's automated. So I think there are so many in between things, and it could even be, are you using emojis? Are you giving this person a reward when they are completing the experience, and you're sending them a gif of saying congratulations? One of my clients is an insurance company, and they actually have a very, very delightful brand, and it just is in the way that they are making something that is boring and might be hard to understand easy to understand, and they are talking to a person in a real way as opposed to in a clinical way, or just sort of using all this jargon that isn't actually how a person would have a conversation with someone in real life.
Yeah, for sure. I see. I definitely, you know, I think we've all interacted with bots like that are not the ones that have been thoughtfully designed to respond and speak to people in that way. But I think it's really cool that like my example of the boring fade in the background can actually be an opportunity where those companies invest a little bit more time and perspective on what does having a human interaction look like, and either reflecting back on the current human interactions that are happening via social media on your pages, but also DMs, which are another support channel. And then even the support channels are also good places where some of that language is already developed and established for brands. So I think that's really important to call out those other departments and talk about, you know, breaking down the silos within an organization, to have your social media team be talking to your design team and talk to your developers who are building, you know, some of these things. Cool. So Hillary, to you again, as you're like, we had a question from one of our attendees, and they're curious about how people can break into conversation design. And this particular person is coming from UX design, and they also really like writing. But how do you think people in tangential technology fields, what are a lot of the roles that are coming into conversation design? And in your, you know, that you have the first job board in this space, you know, what are some of the things that you're seeing as far as the challenges that people have in transitioning into this space from various other you know, areas?
Yeah, well, I think to start out, like Inga was right of saying improv comedy is like the perfect background. And it's interesting because almost everything is the perfect background for this. And I have found, especially if you're coming from a UX design and a UX writing background, you already have so many of the fundamentals that apply to conversational design. And you sort of just need to get into that frame of mind of, okay, instead of, you know, the brand responding like this is an automated thing. And so it's really just kind of changing your perspectives and understanding how the technology comes into play with it, because obviously you're not utilizing natural language understanding when you're like on a website, but you are using it when you're in an automated experience. And so considering how that might change the decisions that you make, that really is sort of the main differences I find. But in general, my advice for everyone is always to just do it. There's so many tools out there that allow you to create your own experiences in practice without having to know how to code. Or if you do know how to code, there are things that can make it a lot easier for you to write the copy and to design, or you could utilize a template just to sort of start playing around and seeing like, okay, if I'm going to play the user in a thing I designed, how does this feel? How does this sound? Is it something that is, you know, this is way too long, or this is too complicated or too open-ended? There's a lot of things that you learn just by doing it. And I really find that that's sort of the best way to get introduced. You know, one of the big challenges I see from people who are just doing that of just saying, I'm going to make my own experiences and then I'm going to try to get a job in the space, is that there's not necessarily a lot of entry level positions right now. But I think that we will see a shift in that. I think that businesses are going to realize that they can, you know, train people to be what they want them to be. But I also think there's a lot that you can do as an individual to make yourself more experienced. So creating real prototypes that actually work that you can use as a portfolio example, or creating experiences for your friends and family or a small business that you know, and just doing these small projects to sort of get your experience and make sure that you're documenting everything along the way so that you can actually explain how you approach something like this, because it's very different for a prospective like hiring manager to just see like a chatbot and interact with it. They have no idea what you actually went through to get there. And that's really part of the work, is you saying, these are why I made these decisions. These are maybe what went wrong and what didn't. And there are a lot of, I think, groups and communities that may have sort of a time where people are all getting together and doing like a hackathon type of thing where people are collaborating on projects. There's so many online communities that you can meet people, like talk about their experience, and even just try to start collaborating with people so you can create these projects. I think, like, for me, as a person who both sees a lot of job descriptions and then also, hires people, I think that if someone is showing the initiative that they are very curious about this, that they really want to know about it, and they're pushing themselves to learn, whether it's through a course or it's through their own, online learning and researching, that is very valuable, as opposed to someone who has not done any of that. And I think that the UX design and the UX writing are all huge assets for hiring managers. So that is like a really good thing that you already have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Inga, you have perhaps some expertise behind some of the ways that people might learn and get into this new technology space as an educational technologist yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a creative background, and coming into this space, I read all the books. I read Designing Voice User Interfaces by Kathy Pearl and Conversational Design by Erica Hall. Like, I read all those books, and they're great. I highly recommend all of those. And there's lots of courses. They're all great as well. But I think what Hillary said about just getting into it, just building something. And the first way to do that is to simply, like, what do I want to have a conversation about? And that's how I fell into it. I had always been creating content for a passive viewer. How do I make this an interactive experience now with an active participant? And I wanted to create a fun story for kids. That's how I got started in it. So I think just thinking about one simple thing that you want to build for yourself or solve a simple issue at home, and then building through that. And yeah, lots of great platforms that you can teach yourself. I mean, I taught myself all of this during a pandemic with 2 kids at home, so you can do it too. So yeah, just build. That's all you can do is learn, and then you'll make mistakes along the way, and you'll just, like anything, you'll just get better at it.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Like, I think that's the practical cool advice everyone can take away, is just go build things and do stuff. Put yourself out there. And if people aren't providing the opportunities for you, find a way, if you can, to provide that opportunity for yourself. And one opportunity that you can have is to sign up to speak at groups like Conversational Collective. Use that as a target for putting something together. New perspectives, new speakers, and people who are new to the industry have very valuable things to say about what it's like to design and develop or create strategy or brand for this type of thing. So we're always interested in having brand new speakers come on, and you can follow us and take a look for some of our speaking opportunities coming up in 2022, because we want to get more voices as more people come into this industry. It's really important to have everyone, have a voice, and we really want this to be inclusive. So I want all those UX writers, those UX designers, and copywriters, people who maybe aren't even yet into the heart, into the technology of the interaction design. You can get into this field, because I think each one of us kind of who are on this call did it by kind of just doing things and figuring it out. So you're seeing us like 5 years in, 6 years in, or a year, a pandemic in, like a hardcore, we're kind of through this, and we've done a lot of just experimenting and playing ourselves. So that's probably the best way to do it. And yeah, with a direction towards your portfolio and what people want to see. Writing is also a really great way. Blogging is a great way to extend your personal brand. Cool. So let's go on to our next question. I know a lot of people who are already in this industry are thinking about not just how do I start a conversational brand and how do I, get my company and team wrapped around this idea of how to brand in this new way, but how do I scale this? How do I think of this as an ongoing endeavor? So maybe there are teams out there who have already built a conversational brand and they're trying to figure out how to incorporate it into their overall guidance. Abigail, what advice would you have for companies that are looking to maybe operationalize or scale that branding work in their day-to-day?
I would always say go back to the customer journey and literally because it's so, you can almost get swept away thinking, yeah, we're going to scale this up and oh, this looks good and we're going to add it in here. But if it's not adding any value to the customer, then what's the point? So I would literally act as your customer, go through each step of your process and start to find areas where you can add value and add delight and think, is the customer going to have a conversation at this point? If so, how can we design this in? And really just, you have to make it into a process. So that's why I suggest that you do follow the customer journey, because then you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it just kind of makes things a lot easier to digest, and you can even chunk things down then. So follow the journey.
Unmute myself. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And so on this journey and on the customer journey, as enterprises are looking to, figure out how to incorporate conversation design, how might me as conversation designer looking at this journey, trying to figure out brands, how might I, talk about the benefits of the conversational interfaces within my own company, within a B2B business atmosphere? Hillary, maybe you can speak to how I can, me as conversation designer, people out there watching, how might they argue the benefits of incorporating some of these new disciplines in the work and in the scaling of the work?
Yeah, well, it's actually not as hard as it might sound, because I think that the business values of using automated and conversational interfaces is quite simple. And you can really speak to what brands are looking for, which is saving money and doing more with less. Having operational efficiencies, creating efficiencies all throughout multiple parts of your business, especially if you're talking about marketing or you're talking about sales. There's a lot that companies are wasting money by having a human do a lot of things. So there's many, many efficiencies that you can sort of look at from marketing and sales perspective of saying, you're going to get more leads with less work. You're going to save money because you are having someone pre-qualify your leads for you when you're then handing them off. And I would definitely encourage you to look into, information around business process automation and also robotic process automation, which essentially is using a bot to do something. So there's a lot that you can do, even behind the scenes, where you are taking this information that you're gathering from your bot, whether that is data, whether that is user profiles, whatever that is, and you can use that to actually create efficiencies within your business that are going to save your company money. And I think from a marketing perspective, you can also consider delivering a consistent brand experience all the time. So, sales reps, customer service reps, we are humans. We are not going to act the same in every single interaction forever, all the time. We're going to have off days. We're going to have technology problems. We're going to have, vacations, whatever. But an automated experience is always going to deliver that consistent brand experience all the time, which is incredibly valuable. Obviously, your brand is the biggest value that you have in your business. And so this is a very good way to protect that brand because you can be delivering this consistent experience. And you can also speed up the way that you are engaging with your customers. So you're available 24/7. You can proactively reach out to people if they are having an issue, and you don't have to worry about, is this person doing their job today, or is it the weekend, or is it 2:00 in the morning? You can really create so many different values from using this. And so I think it's a matter of putting on your marketer hat and looking at all of the things that your business cares about the most, and then figuring out how you can have that relate back to your conversational interfaces.
Very cool. Totally. I definitely agree. And we actually, I want to touch upon, how these businesses can also think about this new type of content and modes of storytelling. And Inga, I know you focus a lot on storytelling and narrative in your work, as you had this, your initial spark getting into this work was around narrative storytelling. How do you think brands and businesses can think about incorporating those aspects into creating new types of content, or leveraging their existing content to speak in some of these new ways, extending their brand? They're finding these new opportunities in areas as they're looking at what they're doing. They're prioritizing things, and now they want to be okay, let's invest in some of this new technology. How do you think brands should think about some of endeavoring down these new channels?
Yeah, I think voice definitely, it encourages accessibility, especially, now coming from the world of academics, accessibility is a big thing that we talk about all the time, and voice can definitely play a part in making content more accessible for listeners. And if you want to make an argument to your brand or your company, there are large brands like Disney, Hasbro, who are doing huge things in the interactive space, because they realize that, if we're talking about smart speakers alone, at least here in Canada, the increased use of smart speakers at homes has gone up exponentially. So I can only imagine what it's like in the UK and the US as well. So we're already in people's homes. So how do we interact with them? You can definitely make a case for that. And then, outside of smart speakers, we're talking about brands like Lexus, who's now building up their own voice controlled, voice controlled within their vehicles. So, it's accessible and it's intuitive. Those are arguments that you can make for using voice first experiences for brands.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, some of what we've seen is maybe it's the lowest hanging fruit of the brands and the companies that can most benefit from some of these interactions, like the automotive space. But really brands can, think about this beyond what are all the different experiences and spaces that brands might exist in where they can leverage this type of voice and conversational interaction. Awesome. So we talked a little bit about marketing. Hillary, you mentioned, really taking a marketing lens as you're looking at these different initiatives and really trying to understand what is the most valuable to the business. What role do you we have a question from our attendees. What role do you see marketing playing in the conversation design process? Where does that fit in? If a company's looking to kick something off, where should they position marketing in the strategy?
So I think that where you position sales, marketing, customer service, whatever it is, should be based on what you want the outcome and what the goal is of your initiatives. So if you are doing an initiative that's purely customer support, you wouldn't necessarily involve marketing as heavily as you would if you were doing something that's for customer acquisition. And so those are kind of what are going to help to make your decision. But I think if you're looking at, an initiative that say is spanning across multiple, you really want these stakeholders to be in the room from the beginning, because you as the designer or the design team don't want to be making all of these decisions without knowing what else they have going on. So a lot of times it's like, you can sort of go down a certain path and then marketing is saying, oh, we actually, don't want this and we want this instead. And you'll sort of get too ahead of yourselves. And then you need to kind of backtrack into, okay, marketing has, these initiatives coming out. So you have like a Super Bowl commercial or something like that. You want your experience to be aware of all of those things. And so if you have something coming up, if you're doing a, large marketing campaign, you would like your conversational interfaces to be aware of those, or perhaps be using those, especially if it is from a branding perspective. You want to sort of be speaking the similar language so that you're going to create the consistent experience. But in terms of actually, writing the copy and like approving the copy, I would definitely leave that to like the user experience team or the conversation design team or whatever you have, because you are going to be advocating for the user more than the marketing people are. And I feel I can say this because I'm both the marketing team and the conversation design team at my own company. But it's certainly tricky to get into a position where you are a sales or marketing person and you are sort of wanting the user to be acting in a certain way, expecting that the user is going to be receptive to certain things. Whereas the user experience team and the research team, they're going to say, no, a user is not going to do that. And at the end of it, like, we all have the same goal. We want the user to come in and complete the experience and get whatever outcome it is that you are after. And so the steps that come in between, someone who understands user experience more is going to understand how to actually get the user to go there. And that's all that the marketing team really cares about, is that the user is going to complete their outcome that they want. And they're going to get those, marketing qualified leads or whatever it is. They're going to get a certain percentage of, self-serve issue resolution. There's going to be certain metrics that they want to reach, but how you actually are getting there doesn't need to be up to them, I don't personally think.
Yeah, interesting, for sure. I like that kind of healthy perspective on the roles and responsibilities in a company, because delineating those is super important. Do Abigail or Inga have anything to share around marketing and the role that plays in, the conversation design process?
I'll go. Yeah, I think that it really does, because marketing is there to kind of bring people to the conversation. It's not necessarily a kind of, marketing's just, it needs to be at every part. And everyone within every department all needs to be talking to each other, rather than like working in silos, because actually marketing is bringing people to the conversation, and it all needs to link up so that when they get to, say, they are talking to a chatbot, they're not like, suddenly they feel alienated because there's been some kind of disconnect, and they're like, oh, is this still, is this the same company? So I definitely think that like marketing needs to basically run through every aspect.
Yeah, super interesting. It's woven throughout every part. And sometimes when we think of these things in silos, we think like, oh, let's sprinkle a little bit of this on and a little bit of this on, and then we'll have, everything together. But in actuality, all of those things kind of need to be moving and evolving together often. And so it's about, understanding the roles and responsibilities and making sure that you're also continually including people.
And I wanted to add, Lauren, on the creative side of things, because I'm coming from the creative perspective who has worked with marketers. And I think creatives and marketers can sometimes butt heads because we have a certain way of like approaching things. The marketers know, who the audience is, and they have certain targets that they need to meet. And the creative's like, well, this is the way it needs to sound or look. And, like we are very driven by a creative need to express ourselves. So we can sometimes butt heads. And I think when you work together really nicely is when you can think about the audience, the listener. You can think about what the key messaging is. And just like having those conversations first with each other before you build something out, you can create some really nice things. When it doesn't work is when the creative is thinking only about the creative, and is just, building maybe very beautiful things, but like, who are we talking to? And the marketer is just thinking about metrics. So if we can find the perfect marriage between the two, then you can have a really nice experience.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about collaboration. It's all about having respect for each other and coming together and being able to have those conversations about what your actual goal is. So like Hillary mentioned, we're all driving towards the same goal. We're all on the same team, and everyone keeping that in mind, because, sometimes the way companies and organizations are set up can prevent some of that. So whether it's like metrics driven or silos or whatever it is that you don't have a process that's set up that fosters that collaboration, you can have some roadblocks, but really driving towards getting more people talking throughout the process seems to be all around a way to manage all of these elements, whether it's brand, marketing, design, and then even on through to the actual development, which is so important because that's how everything gets built. So ensuring that all those threads maintain weave their way through the whole piece. Cool. So we're nearing the top of our hour. We have had such good conversation. I really appreciate like all the discussion happening. I have like one final question for everyone. I think this is a good one because I constantly think about this, and I'm sure you all do, which is like, what is the next evolution of voice and conversation design, whether it be in branding or design? Like, what do you want to see happen in this space? If you could like wave a magic wand. So I'm gonna kick it over to Hillary to kick us off and get your thoughts on the next evolution of voice and conversation design.
Yeah, well, if I had a magic wand, there are so many things that I would want. But I think there's like three probably, I guess, main things that I think we'll see. And one, I think, is like the business buy-in. So I think that companies are really starting to realize that they actually need conversation design. Whereas the past 5 years, it's been sort of, oh, just make this and it will work and it will be great and it will be amazing. And then a lot of these projects like fail, or people are going back and they are trying to resolve the issues they created by not having design and strategy from the beginning. So I think we'll start to see that sort of course correct. I think we're already kind of starting to see that. And then with that, I think we will see an actual like conversation design team emerge with different roles aside from like just a conversation designer. I think there'll be more specialist type of roles, whether that is, conversational copywriter, whether that is AI trainer, whether that is conversational strategist. I think these are all very different skill sets that right now one person is sort of responsible for all of them. And I think we will start to see more of that come out. And yeah, I think that like the third thing probably is like the tools of it all. So I think there's a lot of different segmenting, everyone's sort of doing things differently across the industry. And I think there needs to be a better connection between designers and developers, because right now it's a lot of, we're prototyping over here, or we're writing this conversation in a certain way, and then we're handing it off. And that handoff is a little bit messy. And then also the maintenance of it is a little bit messy because the way things are built is very different from the way things are designed. So I hope that we will see, more things that are sort of bridging that and more things that are helping to support the ongoing efforts of it. So that's just my very short, very long list.
Nice. Awesome. Inga, what are your thoughts for the next evolution?
I'd like to see more engaging content. Again, I'm coming from the audio narrative space. I hear rather some really great things, especially coming out of the BBC. They are just constantly innovating. And I'd like to see some of that here in Canada, or just in North America in general, some really great storytelling, or story living rather. I'd like to see voice incorporated more in the gaming space. We're starting to see a little bit more about how that can be used in the AR, VR space, and just in general. I think it's an opportunity to interact with your experience a bit more in the gaming space. And I'd like to see more diversity. I mean, it's ironic. I mean, we've got 3 panelists. We're all female, but I'd like to see more women in this space, and more diversity, because I think we're not hearing enough from them. We're not getting enough perspective about how to approach these things. So it'd be nice to get more diversity in this world.
Awesome. I agree 100%. And I want to send it over to Abigail for a quick final thought. Where's our evolution of voice going? And then we're going to wrap this up and get everyone off to their day.
I'll keep it short. I think that if we could ramp up the cultural understanding, especially for like global organizations, the way that you may talk to someone in you know, the UK, it might be slightly different to someone that you might speak to in India, and like, can we be more culturally specific with conversation and just be sensitive to different culture?
Absolutely. I think it's an imperative. And that's a great final thought. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thanks to all the attendees for your great questions. Look out for this event on YouTube and for our next Conversational Collective in about a month. I really appreciate everyone's contribution. Thanks so much. And we'll see y'all next time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks all. Please reach out if you want to talk.
Yeah.